Las Vegas, Nevada, March 15th, 1972. Elvis Presley stands in the middle of RCA studio, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning running at full blast. In his hands, a piece of sheet music trembles like a leaf in a hurricane. The song title stares back at him in bold letters, "My Way." "I can't do this," Elvis whispers to producer Felton Jarvis, his voice barely audible above the hum of recording equipment. "You don't understand. This song, it's not safe." Jarvis looks confused. This is Elvis Presley, the man who has performed for presidents, faced down hostile crowds, conquered television audiences, and redefined American popular culture. Nothing scares the king of rock and roll. But as Elvis drops the sheet music and backs away from it like it's contaminated with poison, everyone in the studio realizes they're witnessing something unprecedented and deeply disturbing. The fearless performer, who has never met a stage he couldn't command, never encountered an audience he couldn't win over, never found a song he couldn't master, is absolutely terrified of 4 simple words. And now, the end. What happens in the next 30 seconds will shock everyone present and reveal a secret about Elvis Presley so dark, so traumatic, that it will remain buried for more than a decade after his death. This is the story of the song that Elvis called the most dangerous in the world, the childhood nightmare that haunted him for 30 years, and the terrifying prophecy that would ultimately come true in the most tragic way possible. To understand why "My Way" filled Elvis Presley with paralyzing terror, you have to go back to a moment in his childhood so traumatic that he spent his entire adult life trying to forget it ever happened. Tupelo, Mississippi, January 8th, 1943. 8-year-old Elvis Aaron Presley is celebrating his birthday when his world is shattered by a conversation he was never supposed to hear. The family is gathered in the small living room of their 2-room house when Elvis's great-grandmother, Minnie Mae Presley, pulls his mother Gladys aside for what she thinks is a private conversation. The old woman, weakened by age and illness, believes she is dying and wants to share something that has been weighing on her mind. What she doesn't realize is that Elvis, curious about the serious tone in her voice, has crept close enough to listen through the thin walls of their modest home. "Gladys, honey," Minnie Mae says in a voice barely above a whisper, "I need to tell you something about that boy of yours. Something I saw the night he was born." 8-year-old Elvis presses his ear against the wall, his birthday forgotten, sensing that whatever his great-grandmother is about to say will change everything. "The night Elvis came into this world," Minnie Mae continues, "I had a vision. I saw his whole life spread out like a movie picture. I saw him become the most famous man who ever lived, more famous than the president himself." Gladys gasps softly, but Minnie Mae isn't finished. "But I also saw how it would end, child. I saw him alone in a big house, singing one last song to himself. And when that song was finished, when he sang the words, 'I did it my way,' that would be his signal that it was time to go home to the Lord." The old woman's voice drops to barely a whisper, but Elvis can still hear every terrifying word. That song, whatever it is, whenever he hears it, it will be death calling his name. Mark my words, Gladys. When Elvis sings about doing it his way, that's when you'll know his time on earth is finished. 8-year-old Elvis stumbles backward from the wall, his heart pounding so hard he thinks it might burst. The birthday celebration continues in the next room, but for Elvis, the party is over. He has just heard his own death sentence, delivered by the person he trusts more than anyone in the world. From that moment forward, Elvis develops an obsessive fear of endings, of finality, of anything that suggests completion or conclusion. he becomes terrified of the phrase, "my way," convinced that speaking those words will somehow trigger the prophecy his great-grandmother described. The trauma of that conversation shapes Elvis's entire relationship with mortality and success. He begins to unconsciously avoid songs, movies, and conversations that deal with endings or personal determination. The phrase, "my way," becomes a forbidden combination of words that he will go to extraordinary lengths to avoid. As Elvis grows older and his career begins to take off, this phobia remains hidden beneath his public confidence. But those closest to him begin to notice strange behaviors and inexplicable anxieties that seem connected to themes of finality and personal agency. During the recording of "Love Me Tender" in 1956, Elvis becomes visibly agitated when the lyricist suggests changing a line to include the words, "my way." The suggestion is dropped immediately when Elvis's reaction borders on panic. In 1960, during a casual conversation about career choices, someone mentions that Elvis seems to do everything his way. Elvis's response is so sharp and defensive that it ends the conversation abruptly, leaving everyone confused about what they had said wrong. By the mid-1960s, Elvis's fear has evolved into a sophisticated avoidance system. He unconsciously steers conversations away from topics related to personal autonomy or individual choices. He becomes uncomfortable with interview questions about his decision-making process or his control over his career. But Elvis's carefully constructed psychological defenses are about to face their greatest test. In 1969, Paul Anka writes a song that will become one of the most iconic ballads of the era. The song is "My Way," and it's about to trigger the most terrifying confrontation of Elvis's life. The first time Elvis encounters "My Way" is during a 1970 meeting with his manager, Colonel Tom Parker. Parker, unaware of Elvis's hidden phobia, plays the song as an example of the kind of material that could showcase Elvis's emotional range and maturity. The reaction is immediate and devastating. Elvis's face drains of color, his hands begin to shake, and he experiences what witnesses later describe as a full panic attack. He leaves the meeting without explanation and refuses to discuss the incident with anyone. It was like someone had electrocuted him. Parker later confided to a close associate, "I've never seen Elvis react that way to anything. It was like the song physically hurt him." But Parker doesn't understand what he has just witnessed. He interprets Elvis's reaction as artistic temperament or perhaps concern about the song's commercial viability. He has no idea that he has just forced Elvis to confront his deepest, most primal fear. The 1972 recording session incident represents the culmination of Elvis's lifelong terror. By this point, "My Way" has become one of the most requested songs in popular music, and the pressure on Elvis to record it has become intense. Record executives point out that the song is perfect for Elvis's voice and style. Fans write letters asking why he hasn't recorded what they consider an obvious choice for his repertoire. Music critics begin to suggest that Elvis is avoiding "My Way" because he's afraid it's too challenging for him artistically. The irony is devastating. The song that everyone believes would be perfect for Elvis is the one song that he literally cannot perform without triggering a psychological crisis rooted in childhood trauma. When Elvis finally agrees to attempt recording "My Way" in 1972, it's not because he has overcome his fear. It's because the commercial and artistic pressure has become so overwhelming that he feels he has no choice. He enters the studio that March day, knowing that he is about to face his greatest nightmare. The session begins normally. Elvis runs through vocal exercises, jokes with the musicians, and appears to be in good spirits. But when producer Felton Jarvis places the sheet music for "My Way" in front of him. The transformation is immediate and shocking. Elvis's hands begin to shake. His breathing becomes shallow and rapid. Sweat appears on his forehead despite the cool temperature in the studio. When he tries to sing the opening line, his voice cracks and fails completely. "I need a minute," Elvis says, backing away from the microphone stand as if it's dangerous. But a minute turns into 5 minutes, then 10, then 30. Elvis cannot bring himself to approach the microphone again. The sight of the lyrics, the melody playing in his head, the very concept of the song has triggered a panic response so severe that he is physically unable to continue. "I can't do this," Elvis finally admits to the room full of confused musicians and technicians. "This song, it's not just a song. It's something else, something dangerous, something." When Jarvis asks Elvis to explain what he means, Elvis's response chills everyone present. "My great-grandmother told me that when I sing about doing things my way, that's when I'll know it's time to die. This song, it's death calling my name, and I'm not ready to answer." The session ends immediately. The musicians pack up their instruments in uncomfortable silence. Jarvis cancels all future attempts to record "My Way," and the song becomes an unspoken taboo subject around Elvis. But the damage has been done. Elvis's confrontation with his deepest fear has awakened something that has been dormant for decades. The prophecy that has haunted him since childhood now feels more real, more immediate, more inevitable than ever before. In the 5 years following the aborted recording session, Elvis's behavior changes in subtle but significant ways. He becomes more reckless with his health, more careless with his safety, more fatalistic about his future. It's as if facing "My Way" has convinced him that his great-grandmother's vision was accurate, and that his time is indeed running out. Friends and family members notice that Elvis begins to talk more frequently about death, about endings, about the temporary nature of fame and success. He develops an obsession with spiritual matters and begins reading extensively about life after death. Most disturbingly, Elvis begins to unconsciously fulfill other aspects of his great-grandmother's prophecy. He becomes increasingly isolated, spending more and more time alone in Graceland. He starts talking to himself, often late at night, sometimes singing softly to an empty room. The parallels to Minnie Mae's vision become impossible to ignore. Elvis is indeed alone in a big house, just as she predicted. He has become the most famous man in the world, just as she foresaw. The only element missing is the final song, the moment when he would sing about doing it his way. On August 16, 1977, Elvis Presley is found dead at Graceland. The official cause is heart failure, but those who knew about his lifelong terror of "My Way" can't help wondering if there's a deeper explanation. In the months following Elvis's death, a shocking discovery is made among his personal belongings. Hidden in his bedroom, investigators find a handwritten note that reads, "The song was right. I did it my way, and now it's time to go home." The note is dated August 15, 1977, the day before Elvis died. More disturbing still is the discovery of a tape recorder next to his bed, containing a recording made sometime during the early morning hours of August 16th. On the tape, Elvis can be heard singing softly to himself in the darkness of his bedroom. The song he's singing is "My Way." His voice is weak and tired, but he manages to complete the entire song, including the prophetic line that had terrified him for 34 years. "I did it my way." According to the timestamp on the recording, Elvis finished singing "My Way" at approximately 6:30 a.m. on August 16th. He was found dead less than 12 hours later. The tape is immediately sealed by Elvis's estate and has never been publicly released. But its existence confirms what those closest to Elvis had long suspected: that his great-grandmother's prophecy had indeed come true, and that "My Way" had somehow served as the signal she predicted it would be. Whether the prophecy was real or whether Elvis's belief in it became a self-fulfilling prophecy is a question that will never be answered definitively. What is certain is that Elvis Presley lived his entire adult life in terror of a song that ultimately did seem to herald his death, just as an old woman in Tupelo had predicted when he was 8 years old. The king of rock and roll, who had conquered every challenge and overcome every obstacle, was ultimately defeated by 4 simple words and a childhood nightmare that proved impossible to escape. He had indeed done it his way. And just as Minnie May, Presley had foreseen when that final song was finished, Elvis's time on earth was finished too. The song that terrified the king had claimed its victim at last. Sometimes the things we fear most are not the things that threaten us from outside, but the prophecies we carry within ourselves, waiting patiently for the moment when fear and fate converge to fulfill a destiny that was written in a child's nightmares decades before. Elvis Presley spent 34 years running from a song. In the end, the song caught up with him anyway, just as he had always known it would. The most dangerous song in the world had finally been sung, and the king was dead.